Right, well, welcome to this Legal Aid New South Wales Law webinar, How to Spot a Social Security Issue and What You Can Do to Help. My name is Kerry Wright and I work in the Community Legal Education branch at Legal Aid New South Wales. I'm here today with Donna Flood from the New South Wales Welfare Rights Centre. Hi, Donna.
Hi, everyone.
So to begin, we would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land. We would like to pay respect to the elders of this land, both past and present, and extend that respect to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people attending today or watching the recording. Today's webinar is legal information only, not legal advice, so we'll be able to answer general questions about the topics discussed. We can't address any client issues, but we'll give you the contact details for how to refer a client for legal help, in particular to the Welfare Rights Centre. So also I'll mention that there's a handout on your control panel, which is a copy of the presentation we're using today. Feel free to download that, that handout so that you can take notes as we're talking. So we're going to start with Donna introducing the Welfare Rights Centre, but what we'll do is we're going to do a couple of polls with you, and you use your computer screen to answer the questions that come up. That's just to give Donna an idea of who we've got with us today. So I'm going to launch the first poll now. So that's coming up. Have you ever had a client with a Social Security or mental issue? Yes, no, or I'm not sure. So Donna, I'm just letting people vote before I close the poll and share it with you. I'm sure you can probably anticipate what the answers to this question might be, but most people have voted by now, so I'll close that and share the results. So you can see there, 82% yes, 13% no, and 5% I'm not sure. So part of this webinar, Donna, you'll be talking about how to find out if people have a Centrelink issue as well, won't you?
Yes, we certainly will. And we'll be able to show you what are, you'll be able to ask questions about what is a Centrelink issue and what might be an issue with something completely different but related.
Okay, great. So we'll now go to our second poll, which is coming up now. Have you ever referred a client to a welfare rights lawyer at the Welfare Rights Centre or Illawarra Legal Centre? And we'll talk about why that's important. Yes, no, or I'm not sure which legal services are referred to. So again, I'm just waiting for people to vote, Donna, and I'll share the results with you. Okay, most people have voted, so let me share that with you. So that's coming up. So that's interesting. Half yes, half no, pretty much, and a small percentage not sure which legal service they referred their clients to. So
that is, yeah, I was going to say that is really interesting that that there's been so many people that haven't referred clients out to different legal services. So it'll be interesting to look at whether they even know that the Welfare Rights Centre and Illawarra Legal Centre exists. So hopefully you'll get to know more about us during this presentation.
Yep, so that's where we're at now. So thanks, Donna. Tell us about the Welfare Rights Centre.
Okay, thanks, Kerry. So the Welfare Rights Centre is a community legal centre. We're part of the network of different centres around Australia. There's nearly 40 of us in New South Wales. We're one of the specialist centres. So we work in a very narrow area of law. We only help people with Social Security issues. So we only help people with their payments from Centrelink. We're completely independent of Centrelink and government. And we have, at the moment, we have the equivalent of 5 full-time solicitors and caseworkers. If you have a look at that map, the blue area is our catchment area. So we will assist anyone in New South Wales that has a relationship with Centrelink and that has a Social Security issue. For New South Wales, the only exception is the South Coast. All along the South Coast there, in those local government areas I've listed, the Illawarra Legal Centre has a Social Security service and they assist people in that area. But we back each other up. So if you're not able to get help from them, you're able to come to us.
And I noticed, Donna, there's a few people on our webinar today from Canberra. So do they have a welfare rights centre in Canberra?
Yeah, there is a welfare rights centre in Canberra. There's also welfare rights centres in every other state around the country. If you want to get the contact details of the organisations in your states, head to our peak body, the Economic Justice Australia. On their website, it has all the names and contact details of the different welfare rights centres around the state. Canberra Community Law is the one in Canberra, but as I said, the contact details are on the Economic Justice Australia's website.
Thanks. Yes, I've got a link to the Economic Justice Australia website in the email that'll follow this webinar, so you'll all have that. Okay, so what services do you offer, Donna?
So the work that we do is advice line. We've got an advice line where we assist people over the phone. Because we're the whole of New South Wales, we are a phone service pretty much exclusively. So we'll give one-off advice. We also do representation, and we also do a lot of community legal education, where we're educating people about the different parts of social security law. We actually also work with Economic Justice Australia in their policy work. So we'll be giving them information and data and all sorts that they need for their policy work.
Fantastic. And tell us about your casework.
So we help about 1,700 people a year. We offer information and referrals to a number of people, and as I was saying earlier, we do advices. Our advices will range anywhere from, say, a 20-minute phone conversation all the way through to 6 or 8 hours, depending on what is needed to help the client. Our representations will be, that ongoing legal representation will be to Centrelink, the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, representing them in the tribunal, and we are also able to represent at federal court. However, that is not a common occurrence. One of the really big barriers that affect people for accessing assistance with their Centrelink issues is that they don't actually realise they have one. These issues, they do have social security issues, they can be resolved. They are a legal issue and there is help available, but most people have no idea that a Centrelink decision can be questioned.
Great, thank you. And this is one of your key messages?
Look, one of the things, if you are referring clients to us, it's important to know that in order to get help from a lawyer, in order to get legal assistance, we need to have a legal issue. And that means that Centrelink needs to have made a decision. So Centrelink decisions are made under legislation, and that means that they are a legal issue and a lawyer can get involved and we can give advice. So we need Centrelink to have made a decision, or the exception to that is if someone is completely off payment and in financial hardship, then we're also happy to get involved. Look, and if Centrelink has refused to make a decision, then that's also becomes an issue that we are able to help with. We can't
right.
help people fill in forms though. We're not able to help with hypotheticals and we can't help people fill in forms.
Okay. So these are your priority clients. Do you want to talk about those?
Yeah, sure. Look, this is probably an incredibly familiar list to most of the people here. I imagine that most organisations would have one or potentially all of these in their own priority list. Look, being a part, not if you have a client that's not in our priority list, it doesn't mean that they won't get assistance from us. It just means that you're more likely to get ongoing legal assistance and representation if you are a member of our priority list. But otherwise, there's no one we'll turn away. We will help anyone and give them advice if they have an issue with their Centrelink payments.
When you were just talking earlier, Donna, about decisions, someone's written here, sometimes Centrelink decisions are made verbally only. Is that right?
That's still a Centrelink decision, and you have the right to ask for that decision to be in writing, but it's a Centrelink decision and you can come to us for advice.
Okay, great. And I was wondering, you've got there that you now also assist residents of bushfire affected areas. What type of Centrelink problems are they presenting with?
Yeah, sure. Look, that's a new priority area for us. We received one-off funding in order to assist people who were living in the areas affected by the 1920 bushfires. We're using that funding to prioritise those clients, but also to offer education sessions in those areas. Look, it's actually fairly rare that we get a client coming to us saying, my property has been damaged by the bushfires, and as a consequence of that damage and that incident, I have this Centrelink issue. We're far more likely to have people coming from those areas because the consequence of the bushfires is that there's been a change in the economic circumstance in the area. People have less work available to them. Their hours might have dropped. They might have lost their jobs. There are more people trying to access a Centrelink payment than there might have otherwise been. Look, if they have had an issue with a bushfire, then that might have affected the way their assets have been valued, and Centrelink might be valuing their assets incorrectly. They might be struggling with their mutual obligations, and there's things like that that could be affecting them if they have been directly affected by the bushfires.
Okay, thanks. And are people able to self-refer to you, or do you mainly take referrals from community workers or health workers?
Look, we get the majority of our clients are coming to us as self-referrals. They will find us on the internet. They'll hear about us through friends, through relatives, through all sorts of different ways, and they'll directly contact us. But we do get a large percentage of our clients coming through referrals, direct referrals from community organisations. We get referrals from Centrelink, we get referrals from the AAT, we get referrals from Legal Aid and other government departments. We get referrals from a lot of different organisations out there, but we also get most of our people contacting us directly.
Okay. And somebody's asked, what about COVID issues? Are you now getting a lot of calls from people affected by
Yeah.
COVID-19?
Yeah, so the number of clients that we had coming through increased significantly in March last year when the first lockdown happened. We're also experiencing an increase in our clients contacting us at the moment with the new lockdown, and we're starting to see a number of issues coming through as a result of that are directly related to the COVID payments, so the pandemic payment and the COVID disaster payment.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Well, this is a good slide. All those payments. There's so many
So
of them.
yeah, look, it's important to sort of realise that it's not just a couple of payments. This is not a comprehensive list of the different payments that you get from Centrelink. This is only some of the different assistance that you can get. It's a really large uh, system. There's a huge number of different variables out there.
Mm. Okay, so, and these are the different payment types that people get.
Look, I wanted to show you this slide to give you a bit of an idea of the number of people that are coming to your service that are likely to have a relationship with Centrelink. So if you have a look on the left-hand side, you can see the number of people that in December 2020 had a card, a concession card from Centrelink, and you're looking at around 7 million people that had a concession card. Now, not everyone with a card gets a payment and not everyone on a payment gets a card, but all of these people have a relationship with Centrelink and are potential people that might have an issue with that relationship and need assistance. So it is a huge, huge system. Mistakes happen. There's an enormous number of people. You're talking 1,700. The legislation alone is 1,700 sections. It is an enormous department. It is an enormous system. Centrelink work really, really effectively in a crisis. They can pivot really quickly. They can do things really quickly. They're fantastic. But it's impossible to avoid the fact that mistakes happen. And when those mistakes happen, it feels personal for the person receiving the payment and for the person that mistake has happened to. So there is help available, there's advice available, and there's things that can be done.
Great, thank you. Yes, those numbers are huge for sure, definitely. So Very good points. So just to remind everyone today that today's presentation is general information only. It's not legal advice, and your client should obtain legal advice about their individual circumstances. But today you're going to get quite a lot of information, including contacts for where you can refer clients in different circumstances. And the focus of today's session, that slide's coming up now, is common legal issues with Centrelink, how to spot when your client has a Centrelink issue. We'll use a case study to illustrate that. What are the first steps you can take to assist your client, and when to refer to the Welfare Rights Centre. Okay, so Donna, now we're going to find out how to spot a Centrelink issue. We're ready to move on?
Sure.
Okay, so common social security issues. Tell us about those.
So look, Centrelink issues, social security issues can be really narrowed down to some very basic situations. It's where someone's claim for a payment has been rejected, someone's payment has been reduced, suspended, or cancelled, where a debt has been raised and they've been told they have to pay it back, or where they've got issues with health and concession cards. There are other issues that can affect, but these are the main ones. Why these things happen can get quite complex and can be quite varied, but these are the basic issues that you're going to be seeing. Sort of suspended, rejected, cancelled, reduced, and a debt. To give you a bit of an idea of the sorts of things that we help with, I've got a couple of different case studies that we've had, or a couple of different clients that we've helped in the last few months. We recently helped one client who had a debt of around $200,000 to Centrelink. She'd been asked to repay every cent that she'd received over the previous 15 years because Centrelink decided that she was in a relationship for that entire time and shouldn't have been paid any money at all. Now, the person that they decided that she was in a relationship with was the father of her children. But at no stage had they been in a relationship. At no stage had they ever lived together. At no stage had he ever contributed to her expenses, the household expenses, or any other financial contribution in any way. So she ended up being completely off payment and with a $200,000 debt and young children and children at home that she was caring for. We argued that there'd never been a relationship, that the relationship didn't exist, that the debt should never have been raised and the payments should never have been cancelled. She was put back onto payment immediately. Centrelink agreed with us. They agreed that they had made an error, that she had never been in a relationship. The debt no longer existed because it should never have existed in the first place. So the $200,000 debt was gone and she was put back on payment. Another one that we helped with recently was a woman that came to us who was in severe financial hardship. She was really, really struggling to pay her everyday expenses. She was on an incredibly low rate of age pension, much lower than we thought it should have been. She'd been contacting Centrelink quite a lot, asking about why this had happened and what was going on and if it could be fixed. She'd received a one-off payment from a trust when her husband died. As a result of that payment, her age pension was reduced correctly, and it should have been. But that reduction should have been a one-off reduction. It shouldn't have stayed. It shouldn't have been a permanent reduction. And she'd had this reduction for months and months and months and months and months, nearly a year. We contacted Centrelink on her behalf, and within 3 days she had a $15,000 back payment and her age pension was put back up to where it should have been in the first place. So those are the sorts of things that we have done and can do. But it's really important to remember or to be aware of that we don't just do the big and dramatic. The big and dramatic makes us look good and they're really nice feel-good stories, but actually just even understanding why a Centrelink decision has been made can be quite transformative for someone. To know what's going on, to know what's happened and why it's happened can be an extraordinary thing and can be quite life-changing. So that's also a huge amount of what we do is just explaining and advising why something has happened as well as helping with it.
Fantastic stories and great messages as well. So tell us about this slide, Donna.
Yeah, sure. Look, the thing about Social Security issues and Centrelink issues is that, as I was talking about before, there's a huge percentage of the population that have a relationship with Centrelink. Your client could be anyone. Someone with a Social Security issue could be anyone. And they may have absolutely no idea that they even have a Social Security issue, let alone that that issue is something that can be resolved and that they can get help with that. They might have a really limited understanding about what the issue is all about and why it's happening and what's going on. And they might need a lot of help just to understand that. The other thing is that with the Social Security issue, with Centrelink issues, they can do everything themselves. They can do the appeals, do everything themselves. There's no need to have a representative or someone involved. But as I'll be talking about later, there are risks involved in pursuing a Centrelink issue and questioning a Centrelink issue, and I'll be talking about those later. When you're talking to your client in order to get to the bottom about what's going on, you might have to be incredibly persistent in order to figure it out and in order to get there.
Okay, thank you. All right, so take us through these scenarios that I'm going to bring up on
Yeah,
the
sure.
slide. Thanks, Donna.
Look, as I was saying, when your client comes to you, they may have absolutely no idea that they've got a Centrelink issue. And they might be coming to you with something completely unrelated, and you're going to have to look beyond that in order to find it. So they might be coming to you as a result of the domestic violence that they're experiencing. They might be being paid as a single person when actually they're partnered. And so therefore, could potentially be a massive Centrelink issue, like the woman I was talking to you before with the 15 years worth of debt that went to $200,000. They might be being paid as partnered and actually be getting a lower payment when actually they're single or they're separated under the one roof and should be getting paid as a single person. So there's a potential there that they're on the wrong payment and that there's a serious risk of debt, but they have no idea. They might come to you because they've been accused of a criminal matter, but actually what's going on in the background is that they've got a debt. They're being garnished to repay that debt at an enormous amount, and as a consequence, they're not able to survive and they're having to supplement their income with criminal activities. It could be, yep, Kerry?
I was just going to say, someone asked that question about repayments. So could you, in that case, negotiate a lesser payment?
You can. So you can actually, debts are repaid automatically at 15%. You can contact the debt recovery line and negotiate that repayment down. There's a general debt recovery line and an Indigenous debt recovery line, and you can get it down to as little as $20 a fortnight. They've changed we've heard recently that they might have changed the telephone system for contacting debt recovery. So in order to actually talk to a person and not go through the automated system, you might have to be quite persistent with that as well. We haven't heard officially from the department about what that change is and whether it's permanent. We just heard from a community worker recently who attempted to negotiate for their client.
Okay.
So
So that next point's up, money missing.
yeah, sure. Look, they might come to you with all sorts of wild and wonderful conspiracy theories about having money stolen and people accessing their accounts and being scammed and all sorts. But actually what's going on is that Centrelink has the power to garnish their bank accounts. And that might be what's happened because they've ignored a debt. They haven't repaid it. And Centrelink's gone after their bank accounts. Or finally, and these aren't obviously aren't the limit of the possibilities, but they might be seriously struggling to care for their children and pay for the needs of their family. they might come to you going, yes, I'm receiving family tax benefit, I'm receiving family parenting payment, and it might appear that everything is perfect on the surface, but actually they might be getting the incorrect rate of family tax benefit because it could be being calculated incorrectly. It might be that they have the children more nights than Centrelink knows, and so therefore the amount of family tax benefit has been reduced because the percentage of care is wrong. Or it might be that Centrelink believes that they're getting paid child support at the rate that the child support agency has assessed them at, but they never get it, and they almost never have, but they're being paid at the base rate because of an expectation that they're getting that child support. So even though on the surface it appeared that everything is perfect, they appear to be getting all the payments. The actual rate or the amount of payment they're getting might be wrong, and there might be something that can be done about that.
Okay, thanks very much, Donna. That's really interesting, all those different scenarios that might come up. So we're now going to have a look at a case study involving Mina. So I'll just go on to the next slide and read this out to our. So Mina has come to you because she needs your help to access a referral to a family law solicitor. Mina has 3 children, a boy aged 10 and girls aged 7 and 3. She separated from her husband 2 years ago, and when she first separated, there was an ADVO in place, so a domestic violence order, and Mina had full custody of the children. 9 months after separation, her ex-husband commenced mediation in order to get access to the children. After 5 months, a consent order was filed, granting her ex-husband time with the children every second weekend. In March this year, the consent order granted her ex-husband overnight visits with the children every second weekend and dinner every Wednesday night. At the start of the lockdown on the 4th of July 2021, her ex-husband refused to return the children to Mina. He told her they needed to stay with him as he has a larger house and they would be able to do school from home more effectively from his house. Mina has been asking him to return the children every day since then, and he's promised to return them many times, but never turns up at the exchange point. Mina has asked for your help to get her children back. Okay, so before we move on to Donna taking us through that, I'm going to launch a new poll about Mina with you all. So you can have a look at that. It's coming up now. So what in this story do you think points to possibly being a Centrelink issue? And you can choose more than one answer. Mina has children, 2 under 8, 1 under 6. She's a single parent, children left care unexpectedly, trying to get the children returned, or all of the above. So I think we'll just see that everyone has a chance to vote, and then I'll share the results with you, Donna. Somebody's asked a question, Donna, while we're waiting for that. Are economic welfare rights the same service who holds student visas there? I don't think that's right, but
I don't know. Uh, I don't know whether the economic welfare rights. I've not heard of that organisation specifically. Economic Justice Australia is a peak body that looks after every single welfare rights organisation. They don't see any clients. They're also independent of government, so they've got nothing to do with visas. They're purely Social Security and Centrelink. We don't do anything specifically with visas ourselves, but what visa you're on and what visa you're trying to access, how long you've had that visa, all of that sort of stuff has a huge amount to do with what Centrelink payments you might be able to access. And so we do a lot of work with people that is all related to the visas that they have. I suspect that I haven't actually answered the question that you wanted to
no,
ask.
I think you have in your own way, because now I read the question. I think what it is can you help people who are on student visas?
Yes,
in Australia?
definitely.
so,
If they're
so
trying to access a Centrelink payment, if they're trying to access support from Centrelink, and Centrelink has refused to their application for a payment or any of that sort of stuff, then we're incredibly happy to help them. But if they're on a student visa and are trying to get some sort of permanent residency and they want help with a visa itself, they're better off going to the two community legal centres, either called Immigration Advice and Rights or the Refugee Legal Service, whose name I totally messed up there.
RACS, yeah, Refugee
RACS.
and Advice Service,
Advice and
yeah.
Casework, yes.
Yeah.
Advice, yeah. So, or Legal Aid. I assume, yeah, Legal Aid also does immigration issues.
Yeah, they have a big immigration team.
Yep.
Okay, so this is the results of our poll question, Donna. So you can see there, 64% said all of the above, 32% said it's single parent, 23% said because she had young children, and 23% said that the children left care unexpectedly, and 5% because she's trying to get the children returned. So that's good. There's a good mix there. So do you want to just go through the next slides to answer those
Well, no,
questions?
we'll stay on the slide. Would we be able to go back to the poll questions? Because I wouldn't mind having a chat about those.
Oh, okay. Let's see
Poll
if
answers,
I
that's okay. We don't need to. Look, having a look at those the answers, in a way it was a bit of a trick poll because the two questions that actually show that there's a Centrelink issue, that there might be a problem, that their relationship with Centrelink might not be smooth sailing, and that actually you might need to dig deeper and explore more, was the fact that the children left her care unexpectedly and that she's trying to get them returned. And so therefore for her, the children leaving isn't permanent, that she's trying to get them returned. She believes they should be with her. She thinks that she has custody and should have custody, and that should never have happened. Those are actually the two really key things about that story that should be raising flags and letting you know that something might be going on. Now, the fact that she's a single parent and the fact that she has two children under 8 and under 6, that shows you that she might have a relationship with Centrelink. That shows you that there's a greater chance that she's got a relationship with Centrelink, that she's getting a payment from Centrelink. But it doesn't say anything about if there's a problem. It doesn't say anything about if there's an issue. It's the fact that the kids left and the fact that she's trying to get them back. Those are the two key things that should be going, okay, we might need to look more into this. We might need to ask some more questions.
Great.
So knowing that there are issues and knowing that there might be issues, seeing that flag having been raised, seeing that there could be a problem, we'd really love it if you started asking the questions and exploring to see if there is a Centrelink issue. So the sorts of things that you could be asking her is, do you have a relationship with Centrelink? Are you getting any Centrelink payments? What payments are you getting? Is it parenting payment and family tax benefit because you've got kids, or is it something different? One of the really big questions to ask is, have you told Centrelink that the kids aren't with you at the moment? Have you told Centrelink they're not sleeping at your house? Have you told Centrelink they're not in your care? Does Centrelink know that they're not staying with you? And then, are you still getting parenting payment and FTB? And have you kept getting that payment since the kids left your care at the beginning of July? So those sorts of questions are going to draw out whether she's got the relationship with Centrelink, you assume she does, and if there's a problem.
Okay. And how does Mina respond?
So in our scenario, when we asked those questions of Mina, she said that she is getting parenting payment and she is getting family tax benefit A and B. She's also getting rent assistance. She also said that she's not talked to Centrelink. So she updates her income annually, and she did that for the beginning of the financial year, which was brilliant. She also knows that she needs to declare her income separately for parenting payment and she's been going into MyGov to declare her income every fortnight as she needs to. She told you that she's meant to have custody, that the kids are hers. The kids are meant to be in her care. She's got custody. You know, the ex keeps telling her that he's going to return them. So they're coming back any day now. They'll be coming back at any point. And that she didn't think she needed to tell Centrelink about it because, you know, they haven't permanently left her care. They're coming back. It's only temporary. It's only a short-term thing. She's told you that there's been absolutely no change in her payments. She's still getting exactly the same amount as she was back in June when the kids were in her care. And she's also told you that although she's trying desperately to get her kids back, she's contacting her ex, she's arranging times to exchange the kids. She's really scared for the safety of her kids. She doesn't want to make her ex angry because she doesn't want her kids to be in danger because there is that history of domestic violence. She talked to the police about a week after the kids weren't returned, but they didn't do anything. And so she's been reluctant to push it any further and do much any further at this point.
And I'm thinking, Donna, that there may be a family lawyer involved as well now if she's asked for that referral. So would you work alongside a family lawyer if there was also Centrelink issues like this being raised?
We'd be really happy to work alongside a family lawyer. How much we would be able to help each other's legal matters directly, I don't know, but I imagine there would be a lot of sharing of information for evidence. There'd be a lot of information that we would be able to get from a family lawyer about the domestic violence and about the history of the relationship and things like that. And all of that sort of stuff is really relevant in dealing with Centrelink and in advocating for clients for Centrelink issues.
Okay.
We're happy
All
to
right.
work with other organisations all the time. Yeah.
Yes. So what are these key messages you've got here on this slide?
Okay. So when we think back to the answers that Mina gave us, and when we think back to the things that she was telling us, the really important things that she said, the important information for a social security, for a Centrelink situation, is that she's receiving both parenting payment and family tax benefit. And there are obligations, rights and obligations attached to every payment that you get from Centrelink. That the children left her care unexpectedly and left without a consent, that she believes the kids will come back any day. But the really key things are that she's not told Centrelink that the kids aren't in her care anymore, that it's been more than 14 days since the kids left her care. Now you've got 14 days to report any changes in your circumstances to Centrelink. You must report any changes in your circumstances to Centrelink within 14 days. And if you don't, you run the risk of a debt. And if you let it go for long enough, then you run the risk of all sorts of things happening. But 14 days is a pretty key critical time period. So that beginning of July, that date was a pretty important thing to be listening out for because it's gone beyond 14 days now. It's also really important to note that she is afraid for both her own and her children's safety. And actually as well that she's been trying to get her kids back. She's been working really hard to get her kids back, going to the police, contacting the ex, making arrangements, doing everything she can to get the kids back. But she's afraid for her safety, and there's particular policy things and processes and procedures that are put in place at Centrelink when domestic violence is a factor. We do a whole CLE just on domestic violence. So there's a lot of different ways that domestic violence can affect your relationship with Centrelink, and there's a lot of different things that are in place in order to assist people who are experiencing domestic violence.
Okay, someone's asked a question here. Is the 14-day notification period standard across all payments?
Look, as I said at the beginning, the Social Security Act is 1,700 sections, and that's one of 4 main acts that we use, and then there's a whole load of other acts on the side. So there are exceptions to absolutely everything. 14 days is pretty standard. You can pretty much rely on that, but I'm not willing to say that for every relationship, every payment, everything, it's always 14 days because there's exceptions to everything.
Mm. And someone said here, can we have access to the information available for domestic violence? I think on the Economic Justice Australia website, there is a fact sheet around that.
There's a fact sheet on the website, on the Economic Justice Australia website, on relationships and Centrelink, and I'm pretty sure there's one on domestic violence. Look, at the end of this webinar, I'm going to be putting up a list of standard education sessions that we at Welfare Rights run over the course of the financial year, and one of them is domestic violence. I'm also going to be talking about education sessions that we are making available to community organisations, and one of those can be domestic violence if that's something that you're interested in.
Okay.
But if you have a look later on the on our website or later on in the webinar, you'll get more information.
Yes. And the email that goes out after the webinar has a link to your webpage with all your community legal education sessions coming up.
Yep.
Just sort of on that same issue around the 14 days, someone's asked a tricky question. What are our obligations if a client tells us they're deliberately defrauding Centrelink?
I would need to look into that.
Mm.
I don't think you have an obligation to inform on your clients. I don't think
Mm.
you have an obligation to dob them in as such. I can't imagine that would exist. But Kerry, could we make a note of that, and maybe I'll look into what there might
Yes.
be around that. Look, one of those, if you have someone a client that comes through your organisation that tells you that they have been deliberately defrauding Centrelink, we're really happy to advise on risk of prosecution. So if you have a client that you think is at risk of being investigated for prosecution, please, you can send them to us, and we're really happy to give them that advice. I imagine Legal Aid would as well, and Illawarra Legal Centre definitely would as well. Legal Aid also has a social security department, but please send them to us, because I guess that's another exception to the fact that we need Centrelink to have made a decision. If you think your client is at risk of prosecution, and before they tell Centrelink anything, before they self-incriminate, we're really happy to give them advice.
I agree, and I think Legal Aid, the government law team again, would also agree with that, to get that advice. Okay, so now we'll move on to our next partner. So what are these key messages about children and Centrelink payments?
So with MENA, the really key thing there is that when you're on a Centrelink payment, every Centrelink payment has its own rights and responsibilities and obligations. Every payment has its own things that will mean that you're eligible for the payment or not. And children affect a huge number of different payments in a really large number of ways. So they'll affect whether you're eligible for a payment at all. So parenting payment, family tax benefit, child support, childcare subsidy, all of those sorts of payments, parental leave payment. You need to have children in order to be eligible for them. But they will also affect the conditions that have been placed on a payment. So they might affect whether you've got mutual obligations, whether you have to look for work or not. They might affect how much time you have to spend on looking for work, how many jobs you have to look for, the types of mutual obligations that you have to do. So if you're a single parent and you've got children under the age of 8, then you shouldn't be having mutual obligations. You shouldn't have to take part of the Parents Next program. If you're a member of a couple and you have children 6 years old, under 6, then you shouldn't have to take part of the Parents Next program, have mutual obligations. So they'll affect the conditions that are on your payment. They're going to affect the amount that you get. So they're not only going to affect whether you get a payment, they'll affect just the dollar amount that you actually get in your bank account every week. So if you're on, if you receive the family tax benefit and you share custody with your children, that family tax benefit can be split between two families, between two households. And as long as you have 35% care of the children, then you are eligible for a percentage of that family tax benefit payment. And whoever has the care of the children for the rest of the time will have the rest of that payment. Now, that means that if the amount of care changes at all, the amount of payment that you're going to get is going to change. So if you just increase the number of nights by 1, then that changes your rate of payment. But also, if you just drop by 1 night, that can drop you under the 35%, and it might mean that you're no longer eligible for that payment at all. So really small changes in your situation can affect your rate of payment and your eligibility for the payment. It also will affect things like the income test. So if you're getting a payment, then you're able to earn a certain amount of money for most payments before the rate that you get drops. Now, if you have children, then that's going to change how much you can earn, or the income test that goes on some of those payments. The number of children you have will affect the amount you get. So family tax benefit goes up with every child that you have and things like that. So Austudy, AbStudy and Youth Allowance Student are all affected by whether you have children or not. So it's not only those payments that are specifically for families and specifically for people with children that are affected by your children. It's also all sorts of other payments that are affected by whether you have kids or not. And this is only children. So it's really important to just keep in the back of your mind when you're talking to people that all sorts of things about their life are going to affect their eligibility for a payment. So a change in their relationship, a change in where they're living, a change in whether they've had to move out of the house that they own and moved into rental property. That's going to affect it. All sorts of things are going to affect, potentially going to affect your Centrelink payment. They reach age pension age, and so therefore their superannuation is going to start being considered. So there's the rights and obligations associated with accessing a Centrelink payment can be quite complex, but there's all sorts of things that can affect it. So just be aware of that when you're talking to your clients, and if there has been a change in their life and in their circumstances.
I've got a question here, Donna. So if a parent has under 35% of, well, they use the word custody, but yeah, shared parenting arrangement, they're not eligible for any payment?
They're not eligible for the family tax benefit.
Okay.
Parenting payment, only one parent can get that payment. And the person who has the largest care is going to be the one that gets the parenting payment. If it's 50-50, if the care is completely equal with parenting payment, then the person who has the greatest need and will be most harmed by not receiving the parenting payment will get the payment. For family tax benefit, no. If you have less than 35% care, you are not eligible for any percentage of that family tax benefit.
And can I just ask, Donna, how does Centrelink actually define a child? Is it under 16 or under 18?
That's not something I can really
Right.
I can answer off the top of my head. Look, the way that children are defined, the way that youths are classified and affected by Centrelink changes for the payment. We've actually got a community education session next week that is on young people and Centrelink. It's on Tuesday from memory. It'll go for 2 hours. You're welcome to register for it and attend. But whether you can get family tax benefit as a result of having a child can depend on whether they're studying or not, whether they're working or not, what age they are, whether it could be classified as independent or not, whether your child is able to access a Centrelink payment is going to depend on what payment and what's happening. So they're eligible for DSP when they hit 16. But youth allowance, whether they're eligible for the independent or dependent rate of youth allowance, is going to depend on whether they're able to be supported by their parents, whether they've experienced domestic violence, whether they're 25. So they're not considered independent until 20. There's a 22 moment and there's a 25 moment. There's all sorts of things going on. Children of refugees are considered dependent on their parents until the age of 22, and that will affect what payments they can get. So there's no flat definition of children. It all depends on why you're asking, whether it's and what's going on.
Okay. Now someone's asked here a question. When one partner is in custody, the other parent is only eligible for half the partnered rate of the parenting payment. Can this be challenged?
I've not come across that, and I'd be really interested in exploring it. That's a really interesting issue. So if you have a particular client that's got that issue, I'd be really interested in send them to us. Let us have a look into it. It's not a question I can answer off the top of my head.
Okay, well, we'll follow that up with that person who asked that question. So what would happen in situations of domestic family violence where the perpetrator is claiming that they care for the child full time? However, this is not true.
So there's Centrelink have enormous powers of investigation. So they're able to investigate into that. Look, if there is domestic violence, I'd be asking for a social worker to get involved, and I'd be presenting evidence of the care that is given to the children. One of the things I didn't mention about MENA earlier is that for parenting payment and family tax benefit, there are situations where you can actually get parenting payment and FTB for longer if you have lost the children the children have been removed from your care unexpectedly and you're attempting to get them back and there's evidence of it. So that's often in a case where there's domestic violence, and that evidence of care and custody, it's presenting evidence, it's getting letters from teachers and the principal, it's getting information from the homeless shelter or for some support workers, the GP, all the people around, the neighbours and that, and just showing giving the evidence to Centrelink about the care and custody care that is being provided for the children. It can take time for the decisions to be made, and if so and with situations like that, please send them to us. Like, please send your clients to us if that's happened to them. Let us talk to them, let us see what we can do.
And that's a good we've got another point here. Some payments can continue even when kids are not in your care under limited conditions.
Yeah, as I mentioned a minute ago, with parenting payment and family tax benefit, in some limited situations, it's possible to get those payments to continue even when the children have been removed from your care. But you need to be showing that what you're doing in order to get the children back. So that reporting to the police was a really important piece of information for that. The going to your organisation to get help to get the kids back, all of that. Look, it's only for limited periods of time that you can get the payments, but you also need to be telling Centrelink within the 14 days of the change of circumstances in some of these situations. And if you, in some of these situations, you're not going to get those payments unless you're telling them within the 14 days. But we do we do a CLE that's purely on children and relationships as well. It can be a
Fantastic.
complicated area.
Big issue. Okay, so what can community workers do to help someone like Mina in her circumstances?
Yeah, sure. So if you have Mina come into your organisation, and that's the story that emerges, you're able to contact. You could help her by contacting Centrelink and requesting an appointment with a social worker, mentioning domestic violence, because there are policies and processes in place to hook people up with social workers when domestic violence is a factor. That social worker will be able to assist Mina and will also be able to mediate between her and Centrelink. They'll also potentially be able to refer her to other organisations that might be able to help. So you're going to be able to assist Mina to update her circumstances about the care of her children with Centrelink. You could assist her to apply to have her parenting payment and family tax benefit continue, even though she doesn't have the care of her children, and have it continue for as long as possible or until the children are returned. As I said before, there's limits to the amount of time that Centrelink will pay those payments. You're also going to be able to assist Mina to gather evidence of her attempts to get those children returned, because that's going to be important evidence in order to have her payments continue.
Okay, so you've spoken, oh, there's something come up here, warning.
Yep. Look, your client, if they haven't informed Centrelink within 14 days, is going to be at risk of a debt. Okay. They also, if it goes on for long enough, they might be at risk of being investigated for prosecution. So if you have someone who hasn't updated their circumstances within 14 days, and there's been a really significant delay in reporting that change, it might be worth getting legal advice before reporting and before that self-incrimination, before telling Centrelink what's happened, just so that your client and you are aware of the consequences of what's happened.
Okay, thank you. And you've spoken a little bit about the Centrelink social workers. Tell us a bit about their role.
Yeah, sure. Look, just remember that they exist. It's really important to remember that they're there. They do play an important role, and they can have a really powerful effect on someone's relationship with Centrelink and their eligibility for payments and what happens. So they can do short-term counselling and referrals and information. As I said, they can also mediate between. They can also be a go-between between the client and Centrelink. They can be useful when there's family and domestic violence and mental health and other things in a person's life that makes them especially vulnerable. There's no telephone number or set way to get a social worker. It's just call any of the Centrelink phone numbers and ask for an appointment to be made with a social worker. They're no longer full-time in every office. So there's less of them now than there used to be, but every office should have, my understanding is that every office would have a social worker. They just might only be there 1 or 2 days a week and go between different centres. And it is likely that you'll have a telephone appointment and not an in-person face-to-face appointment. But it is any telephone number, any Centrelink number that you can just call. They do have, if family and domestic violence is mentioned, then there should be a much smoother and quicker process to getting a social worker. That's part of the policies that have been implemented in the last few years.
Okay. Someone's said here that they've had trouble trying to find a phone number for the FISOs. Can you provide this, please? So they're the financial people, aren't they? The
Oh,
FISOs.
FIS, so the Financial
FISO.
Information Service?
Yes, sorry,
Yep,
might be FIS. Yeah.
sure.
So
So
that is,
the telephone number is 132 300. So the Financial Information Service is 132 300. Just remember, they're brilliant when you want to get information and understand really complex financial things or anything like that and understand what's going on. But remember, when you're talking to them, you are talking to Centrelink. They're not independent of Centrelink. They are a part of Centrelink. So what you're telling them is going on your client's file. Or, you know, they are all a part of Centrelink, but they are really good for when there's complex issues going around.
And someone's asked a question, can a Centrelink social worker help a client complete forms if a person is not capable of doing so themselves? For example, if they have mental health concerns.
Look, there's all sorts of processes and practices in place at Centrelink that are meant to be to help people who have issues with accessing Centrelink payments. So it could be if they've got technological issues, if they're a cold background, if there's mental health issues, if there's all sorts of things. I can't tell you specifically that Centrelink social workers will definitely fill out a form for you, but I do know that if there are mental health issues, then Centrelink workers can help in order to help someone access a payment.
Okay, great. All right, so when would our listeners refer Mina to you?
Sure. So those other things before are your first steps and things that you might want to do. But in Mina's situation, you might want to be referring to us if the kids have been out of the care for a long time and she hasn't reported. So we're well outside those 14 days and advice is needed for the consequences of what might happen when she tells Centrelink. Please refer to us if it looks like she's deliberately misled Centrelink and there's that risk of prosecution. If Centrelink cancel her payment after she lets them know that the kids are gone and don't grant a different payment, if they don't allow for that temporary extension of the payments while she's fighting to get her kids returned, or if they get a debt. So each of those are Centrelink decisions about eligibility for payment, rate of payment, suspended, reduced, debt. You remember those first Centrelink, the list of Centrelink decisions that are the majority of issues that happen that we talked about at the beginning of the webinar. All of these things come under one of those. Cancelled payment, rejected application, debt. So if any of those things happen, please refer her to us. We're really happy to advise and potentially help. And remember that 14-day time limit to report the changes, okay? Because by reporting within the 14 days, you won't get a debt. Reporting outside and you're at risk of a debt.
Okay.
Look, I just wanted to pop this slide up. It's one that we use when we are training our intake officers. It's the sort of questions that are quite useful in probing about whether there is a social security issue in the story that's being told. So it's just a handy list and a handy little thing to have around. So as I said earlier, there are a whole load of aspects in a person's life that could affect their eligibility for a payment. And it might initially seem like there's no issue and they wouldn't have any effect whatsoever. So just asking the questions and being aware that the requirements for Centrelink payments are really broad reaching and quite strict. It's just helpful to know.
Mm. And as I said earlier in the webinar, there is a handout on your GoToWebinar panel, which is a copy of this presentation. So one of their slides obviously is this one, and you could keep this as a ready reckoner next to your computer when working with clients, just to check if Centrelink might be an issue.
Look, just before we move on to the next one, the thing to be aware of as well, if someone comes to you and they don't have a relationship with Centrelink, they're not getting a payment, they don't have a relationship at all, that actually could be a sign that there's a problem. And it could be a sign that they have a Centrelink issue. It might not be that they're earning too much money and their assets are too much or something like that. It might be that they need a payment, but they've been rejected, or they've walked into a Centrelink office and have been told by the person behind the counter to not even bother applying because they'll never get it. They'll never be eligible. Don't bother. So there's you know, it's possible that even the not having a relationship with Centrelink can be an indication of a problem as well.
Okay, good point. Thank you. All right, so now we're going to have a look at debts. So as Donna said, we'll have a look at this section, and then I'll ask your questions if it's related to debts. And also, of course, we'll have time at the end to look at other questions. So Donna, do you want to take us through this slide?
Yeah, sure. Look, so a debt comes about when Centrelink believes that someone's received a payment that they weren't entitled to, or received more of a payment than they were entitled to. It's a really big area of issues relating to Centrelink. We do a CLE purely on debts. You're welcome to register for it.
Fantastic.
Look, so when someone gets a Centrelink debt, this is what they're going to get. This is the letter they get. It is incredibly densely packed with words. It can be very confusing. It's incredibly confronting, and it doesn't always give you a huge amount of information about why a debt's come about. So if we look at this letter, you can see where that red circle is, that it tells you the period of time that Centrelink believes you got the wrong payment, or that you got too much payment, next. This one here will tell you why you got the wrong, why they think that you got the wrong payment. So in this situation, it says that the correct value of your assets was different to the value that we used in calculating your payment. It doesn't tell you what the asset is. It doesn't tell you what the value of the asset, what they believe the value was when they were calculating your payment, what they believe the value actually should have been, why they've changed that valuation, where they got the information from, what's behind the reason for revaluing it. It doesn't give you any of that sort of information. It doesn't tell you whether the value of the asset changed on the 2nd of October and then again on the 10th of November, and then, it doesn't give you, it just says assets. It doesn't give you a lot of information. So up the top there is the amount that they believe they were overpaid, and underneath that, in that same circle, you'll see that there is a date. Now, the old debt letters used to say due date 21 of April, which made it feel like you had to pay the entire amount by that due date. So they have changed it and has said quite specifically to set up an arrangement to pay, but they've said exactly when it needs to be set up by. It's really important that you set up that arrangement by that date, because there are financial penalties if you don't. And the telephone number to call in order to set up that arrangement is down the bottom, is there in that 4th circle. Look, there is also an Indigenous debt recovery line. That's not that telephone number. It is a different one. It's 1800 138 193. So if you have an Indigenous client with a debt, there is a telephone number that can be called that's not the normal one. So as you can see from this, there's not a huge amount of information. They can be incredibly intimidating, but there is really important information there that you need to be able to hunt out and find.
So Donna, that general debt line is that one on the screen now, 1-800-076-072?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Cool.
All right, so another key message coming up, Donna.
So one of the really important things one of the main things I hope you remember from this, I really hope everyone remembers this one piece of advice from this webinar, and that is, do not ever appeal a debt without getting advice or examining the risks. The thing about debts is that there's no time limit to appeal a debt. There's no issue if you get into a repayment plan, start paying it off, or even pay off the entire amount. There's no time that you have to have questioned the debt by before you lose your right to question that debt. You can take your time, you can examine what's going on, you can work out why the debt was raised and all of that sort of thing. Because if you appeal a debt, if you ask Centrelink to look at a debt and you ask them to examine whether the debt should have been raised or whether it should be waived or recalculated in some way, then when they look at it, they're not necessarily going to leave it the same or drop it. They might decide that actually they got it wrong and the debt should have been bigger and it should go up. And so by appealing the debt, there is the risk that the debt could increase. And it's not uncommon for us to have people approach us for the first time when they might have received a $2,000 debt, they appealed it, and they come to us because suddenly they have a $12,000 debt.
Wow.
Yeah, that's not, it's not uncommon, which isn't to say that I don't want you to be afraid of appealing. Don't go, I can never appeal a debt, but just be aware there are risks, and those risks can be costly for your clients.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, tell us about freedom of information then, FOI.
So one of the things about debts and one of the things about Centrelink is it's not, the debt notice doesn't give you a huge amount of information, you know, and it's not always possible to really understand why a debt's come about or what's going on until you look at the client's file. And so doing a freedom of information request is the most common and the easiest way to do that. And that will give us information about what Centrelink knows. It tells us if they've made a mistake, if there's been an administrative error. It tells us if there's a risk that the debt will increase, that actually the debt shouldn't have gone from October to December, it should have gone from January to December. Or that, October to December, you got a debt for job seeker, but you also should have got a debt for another payment, the family tax benefit that you were getting at the same time, or something else that you were getting at the same time and you didn't. So it gives us it lets us see whether there is a risk of the debt increasing. It tells us what the client has told Centrelink, what information they've got from other departments and other organisations, hospitals, workplaces. It also will give us information that the client finds it really difficult to get and evidence that the client might struggle to get themselves. And it will confirm the client's instructions. It'll confirm the information that the client's giving us. So Centrelink only knows what they've been told by your client, by other departments. And a freedom of information request is going to let us know what they've been told and what your client's told them. Centrelink also has significant powers to obtain information themselves. They can get bank statements, they can get hospital records, they can go to educational institutions, immigration departments, all sorts to get information. And that's how we can also discover what they have obtained from other organisations. Now, this FOI pile is a real one. It's one that we got. But it's, we took a photo because it was unusually large. They're not usually
All
that
right.
big at
Oh,
all,
okay.
but they can be quite dense to go through, and they're one of those tools that are needed to be used.
Okay.
So
So
yeah, we
tell
will
us
talk
about
to any client that gets a debt and advise them.
yes, yes, good message. So what about the debt recovery line though at
Sorry,
Centrelink?
the telephone numbers were right there. Look, so the debt recovery line is that due date. You need to call the debt recovery line by that due date. If you don't contact by the due date, then they can charge interest, which is up to 10%, but they can also charge if they send the debt to a debt collector, then they will charge a 10% debt recovery fee. So if you have a really large debt, that goes to the debt recovery fee, say that $200,000 debt, if that woman hadn't got into a repayment plan and it had gone to debt recovery, she would have gotten a $20,000 debt recovery fee on top of it. 20? Yeah. So it can be an enormous amount of money. So getting into a repayment plan is really important. It doesn't affect your eligibility to appeal. It's not, by getting into a repayment plan, you're not admitting liability, you're not admitting that you owe the debt. It is merely avoiding the financial penalties and starting to pay it off. If
Mm.
your client's on a Centrelink payment, they will automatically start deducting 15% from that Centrelink payment at the 28 days. And you can negotiate to have that reduced down to as little as $20 a fortnight. As I said, we've heard from a community worker recently that the telephone lines at the debt recovery line have changed, that there is an automated process now where you type in the amount you want to repay, and it doesn't like it when you offer to pay less than 15%, so you have to be quite persistent to talk to a person in order to negotiate it down, but it is possible. Look, Centrelink can also garnish bank accounts, wages, they can force sale of assets if you don't get into that repayment plan and it's left for long enough that they start taking action in order to recover the debts.
Mm. Okay. Well, thanks, Donna. I might ask some of these questions now, if that's okay.
Definitely.
So someone said, can Centrelink debts that are fraud related be can Centrelink debts that are not fraud related be statute barred?
No.
No. Okay.
I think, look, could you record that one and I will confirm that.
Hmm.
There's no time limit to appeal a debt. So the person who has the debt can appeal a debt that's 20 years old if they want to. There's no time limit. But the flip side of that is that Centrelink can raise a debt that's very old as well. As a practice, as a policy and as a practice, they don't. But that's not a statutory requirement, that's policy. But I
Okay.
will, I will confirm that.
Okay. Is it possible to reduce Centrelink debt repayments longer than 3 months if someone is in long-term financial hardship?
So Centrelink debt, the repayment plans need to be renegotiated every 3 months. So you can renegotiate every 3 months. Whether they will put in place a repayment plan that goes for longer than 3 months, I'm not sure. You'd have to ask. But as a standard rule, you've got to renegotiate every 3 months.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Can you please explain how someone can have a debt raised 20 years ago and be expected to pay it? The client was claiming family tax benefit for her children who left her care and went overseas to live with their grandparents. They forgot to tell Centrelink that they had other children, and they were receiving payments for those children. So,
If you're in New South Wales, could you please send them to us? That's quite an unusual circumstance. It's very, very unusual to have a debt that old. We'd really love to advise your client.
okay, thank you. All right, and we'll give all those contact details at the end on how to get in touch with you. So I think we'll move on to appealing decisions now, Donna. So
Sure.
we'll go on to that. Oh, I did want to mention in terms of the Centrelink debts that I recently recorded a podcast episode for our Law for Communities on the Go with the director or the principal lawyer at the Welfare Rights Centre, and it was particularly around Centrelink debts, one of her passions, as she said. So that's another place where you can go for some information, as well as the community legal education sessions that Donna's running on a regular basis, which of course are great because you can ask questions directly. So tell us about this, Donna, appealing a decision.
So we've been talking all the way along about issues with Centrelink and Centrelink decisions and what you can do about it. And, it's the what you can do about a Centrelink decision is appeal the decision. Any Centrelink decision can be appealed. Any decision by Centrelink, you're able to appeal it. But as I've already sort of indicated, not all Centrelink decisions should be appealed. The risk, debts is the main one. The risks of debts increasing are there. And so you think twice before you lodge the appeal and get some advice before you lodge the appeal. I don't want to discourage you from appealing Centrelink decisions at all. That's not what I want to do at all. I just want you to not make appealing a decision an automatic process within your organisation. I want it to be the risks to be examined and thought about before an appeal is lodged, and for you to potentially go to other organisations to get legal advice before the appeal is lodged, rather than just doing it automatically.
Okay, thank you. And how do you decide to go forward with that?
Yeah, sure. Look, appealing a decision is very simple. It's a phone call. It's ringing. It's ringing Centrelink and saying, I would like to appeal this decision. Okay, it's very straightforward. There, you can always Google, and there are forms. There's a form you can fill in instead, appealing a Centrelink decision form, but actually it's a really, really straightforward thing. The process of appeal has changed recently. It used to be that when you lodged an appeal, it would go back to the person that made the decision in the first place for them to check, and then it would possibly go to a person who is an expert in that particular subject. It changed in the last couple of months. You now have the right to request an explanation of the decision rather than an appeal, or you can go the formal appeal route. Now, the first really formal level of appeal is called the Authorised Review Officer. They're an independent person within Centrelink that looks at the decisions made by others and makes and decides whether that was the correct decision to make or whether it should be varied. Once you get that decision, if you disagree with it, it's then an external process and it's heading to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. There's two levels at the tribunal. There's the first level, the Social Security Division, and then there's the second level, the General Division. And those are all different stages of the appeals process that we can advise on and help with. After the tribunal, it's heading to the federal court, but as I said, that's an incredibly rare thing because not many people on a Centrelink payment can afford to go to the federal court. So the thing about appealing decisions, if we think back to that debt notice and we think about the information that's on that debt notice, there's not much there at all. And any other decision that you get from Centrelink has a very similar amount of information. It might say you can't get the payment because you're not eligible because of your visa, or you can't get the payment because you're not eligible because your medical condition isn't fully diagnosed, treated and stabilised. It doesn't give you a huge amount of information, and it can be sometimes that actually appealing the decision will get you a document that contains a lot more information about why the decision was made, and it can be incredibly useful when looking at giving legal advice. But it actually can also be really useful for decisions that they want to make in the future. So to be able to decide, is it worth even making a new application? Is there any point in doing things, or should I be changing what I'm doing in some way to change my eligibility for a payment? That information might come from an appeal. So with some things, we're actually going to say, we can give you legal advice, but we're not going to be able to give you really comprehensive, useful advice until after you've appealed to an authorised review officer. So the disability support pension's one case in point, that for sometimes it's important, that information contained in an appeal isn't useful just because to get a decision changed. The appeal process can be useful to just gain more information about why a decision was made.
And do you explain when you talk to people about Centrelink appeals, whether there's costs involved or not?
Oh yeah, yes, there's no cost involved. So appealing within an internal appeal within Centrelink, it's free. There's never any costs. You'll never have to pay the legal costs of Centrelink or anything like that. And then to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, the lodging the application is free. There's no application fee, and you won't be, you don't have to, there's no other fees and charges associated with that process. Now, once you hit the federal court, that all changes. So there's an application fee to lodge in the federal court. It's also what's called a cost division. That means that if you are not successful in the appeal, then you may be liable to pay the legal fees or the legal costs of Centrelink. So But for the first level, so internal reviews within Centrelink and then also those later reviews through the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, there's no costs.
Okay, thank you. All right, so tell us about time limits, Donna.
So I indicated earlier that there's no time limit to appeal a debt. It's a really important thing to remember so that you've got time to look at the risks. For debts, the time limits kick in once you have a decision from the first level of the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. Every decision from that first level, there's only 28 days to appeal to the next level, and it's a really, really strict time limit. Now, for all other decisions of Centrelink, there's different time limits that are involved, and it's important to remember them, because if you don't follow those time limits and lodge your appeal in time, you might be that your client is not going to be permitted to lodge an appeal at all. They lose their chance to appeal that decision. Or it might be that even if they win the appeal and they're successful, they're not going to be eligible for as much back pay as they might have been eligible for if they'd lodged the appeal in time. So being aware of the time limits is quite important. This might be a really handy little chart to just keep by you just in case.
Okay. All right. Where are we up? Last bits and pieces, Donna. So we might go through those and then I'll check what sort of what questions we've got from our audience today. So firstly, tell us about your regional access project.
So with that one-off funding that we received for the bushfires, to assist people in bushfire regions, we've launched a regional access project. What we are wanting to do is we're wanting to reach out to regional areas and to let people know we exist. We're aware that a lot of people don't know that we're here and that we're able to help, and we're wanting to explain how people can refer clients to us. We're also offering tailored training to different service providers in those areas and other regional areas that might come across people with a Centrelink issue.
Okay. All right. And I think the next slide we're talking about, training,
Yeah,
which is
so this is
something you
that
spoke to us
tailored.
about. Yep.
Yeah, look, this is that tailored training that I was talking about. So what it is that we're happy to do information sessions or education sessions. We're happy to do them look in person or over Zoom. I'm really hoping that eventually we'll be able to get back to being in person. So I'm leaving it there. But at the moment, obviously, everything's over Zoom or over the internet. It can be for an individual service, an interagency, or a region-wide session for whoever's interested. And it's on topics that you want. You know, it's whatever you would like, whatever you're interested in. So it could be top tips and basics. It could be disability. It could be families, migration, debts. It can be anything you want. I'm designing one at the moment that is for what people on frontline emergency services can do in that first instance when they're talking to someone that comes to their organisation with that financial emergency issue, and what are those first steps? What are the first things you can do? I've also done ones that are tailored for disability organisations that look at, you know, carer payment, care allowance, disability support pension, how disabilities affect other payments. It's whatever you and your organisation needs. I'm really happy to tailor it to you. Look, at this stage, this tailored training is freely available to anyone that contacts me until the end of March. I'd love for it to go for longer, you know, so just keep trying. Contact us at any time that you're interested. But if you get to me before the end of March, I can, you know, I can pretty much promise you that I'll train.
There's still a few months until then, so
Yeah.
plenty of time to get in touch with you. But there's also this option here of all the webinars
Yeah.
you've got planned coming up, which is amazing.
So every financial year, we as an organisation run standard education sessions. They run for 2 hours and they're on a specific deep dive into an area. As I said, the next one's next week. If you head to our website, you can just register for it through Eventbrite. all of our staff here run these sessions, so you'll get a different person every time. It won't necessarily be me, and they're on all of those particular subjects. So just pop on our website and register.
And so those tailored workshops that you just spoke about, you fit those in around these other commitments
Yeah,
with these webinars.
yeah. So I'm
Great.
working 3 days a week as an educational, as community liaison. So that's what I'm doing for 3 days a week at the moment.
And I guess the topics here for the webinars give people an idea of the types of topics that you can deliver in their workplace tailored to their scenarios,
Yep.
as you said. All right, what have we got up here? Okay, here's your contact details.
So this is how to get in contact. So as I said at the beginning, that South Coast area of New South Wales, Illawarra Legal Centre is the catchment there. Clients can contact us on the telephone numbers there. If you're an organisation and you'd like to directly refer a client to us, then you can call us on our admin line or email us. And if you'd like to get in contact with me about potential training and workshops, then that's my email address there.
Okay, great. So I might just read out for the Welfare Rights Centre for Clients, the number's 1-800-226-028 or 0292115300. Okay, well, that's fantastic. So I think, oh yes, your advice lines. When do you do advice over the
So
phone?
those telephone numbers that Kerry just read out, they're only open on Mondays and Wednesday mornings and Thursday afternoon. So that's where our advice line is open and when those telephone numbers are active.
Okay, great. But if someone makes a warm referral to you, the lawyers will ring back
Yeah,
outside of those hours.
yeah.
Yeah.
That warm referral, those warm referral contacts are open business hours all the time. Yeah.
Okay. And when someone rings the phone advice line, do they speak directly to a lawyer or do they talk to the intake officer first?
So they'll talk to an intake officer first. They will ask them about what's going on and get some information. And it might be that they will get information or a referral at that stage rather than being brought in for advice or an appointment, or they'll be called back and an appointment will be made to talk to a solicitor.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, there's some information here. Do you want to share that with us, Donna?
Look, if we do have a number of social media accounts, and what we use those for is to update people on changes that are happening in social security. So things like the COVID payments were updated on social media, all other payments, the change in the age pension rate that happened recently, all of those sorts of things, we try and update people on social media as soon as they happen. So if you we also advertise our education sessions. So if you want to follow us on social media, you'll be able to keep up to date with what's happening.
And so they're the addresses there that people can use for Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And there's a little comment there on the side. Was that someone just promoting your Facebook page?
That was a completely it was a random comment that someone put on our Facebook page. It was really lovely, so we popped it on our slide.
It's good to use these things, I think. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our webinar. So thank you so much, Donna. I'll just see if there's any questions here. Some of them are quite lengthy, so I think what we'll do is we'll follow those up afterwards because all the questions are being recorded. So I'll share those with Donna and she might be able to she will be able to get in touch with you directly. But I think the message that Donna's given to you all is please call them to make a referral so that they can talk to you about your client's circumstances. But there's one here, can you clarify what consists of fraudulent debt and in what circumstances does Centrelink prosecute?
No, I can't. I'm not a criminal lawyer, and fraud is a criminal charge. So I can't give you the breakdown of what constitutes fraud because that's a criminal matter. whether Centrelink will prosecute or not, there's nothing that's really consistent that I can say. I can't say if the debt is over this amount, if the debt runs for this period of time, if the debt is this, if the debt involves this sort of behaviour, then you're more likely to be prosecuted for fraud. That's not a list I can give. What we do every time is it's very much, the advice we give is very much based on the individual circumstances.
Okay. And someone said, I work with inmates, so people in custody, who may not be aware of a debt until they're released many months later. How can
Yeah.
she help?
So then, look, I don't know whether contacting Centrelink for every single inmate to see if a debt is there I don't think there's any value to that. Look, if you have inmates that have debts, then it's possibly the perfect time to start investigating for risk of whether a debt will go up while they're not repaying it because they're incarcerated. How you can help with your clients, until someone knows that a decision is made, it's really hard to do anything. And so maybe it's finding out if there's anything floating around at Centrelink that you need to help with. If you have specific inmates that have got specific Centrelink issues, as always, I've probably said this far too much now, just send them to us. Let us talk to them. Let us talk to you.
Yeah, so it might be easier for them to talk to you in terms of the prisoners themselves at that point, being able to talk directly to you. Okay, so basically I'm just getting a lot of thank yous. It's been really educational. I really appreciate your time and sharing your wisdom, which I agree with. So it's been really informative. So I don't know that we've got any other questions other than the ones I've asked during the webinar, but if people want to type any last questions, no, everyone's just saying thank you. So someone's asked, when should we call the Financial Rights Legal Centre or Law Access instead? So I suppose that's quite a good question.
Yeah. No, financial rights are amazing. They're such a fantastic centre. So they've got their debt line. So if you have a client with a debt of any sort, then they can go to financial rights, but financial rights will usually refer to us for the Centrelink part of those debts. So heading to financial rights for debts full stop is fantastic. They've also got the Indigenous mob
Helpline. Yes.
Yeah, they've got an Indigenous specific helpline for debts there. They've got their insurance department and a whole load of other things. So look, call financial rights for any financial issues whatsoever, but just come to us for the Centrelink aspect.
Yeah, and Law Access New South Wales is that general phone line, so they'll make a referral as well if it's a Centrelink matter.
Yeah, so Law Access refer to community legal centres constantly, so they'll just send them to us or financial rights or whoever's appropriate.
Yes, that's right. So people are saying thanks, and someone said they'll definitely be in touch about getting some training. So do you want to just tell us your email address to be recorded, Donna?
Yeah, sure. So my email address is Donna, FDONNAF @welfarerights.org.au.
Great, thank you. All right, well, thanks very much, Donna, for your time today and helping us understand Social Security law and how community and health workers can help their clients directly with Centrelink or by making a warm referral to the Welfare Rights Centre, one of our wonderful specialist community legal centres here in New South Wales. A reminder that there's a feedback survey link after the webinar. After I close it, you'll get one, or there'll be a link in the email that you receive after the webinar, which will have links and phone numbers to the information that Donna's covered today. If you're watching this webinar as a recording, you can send your questions to our email address, cle@legalaid.newsouthwales.gov.au, and we'll pass them on to Donna to follow up. And if your client has other legal problems, you can refer them to Law Access New South Wales on 1300 888 529 for free legal information and referral, including to community legal centres and Legal Aid New South Wales. So we look forward to welcoming you all to our next Law for Community Workers webinar. And Donna looks forward to welcoming you to all her webinars, which are coming up, which you'll see on their website. So please take advantage of those because they'll be incredible, as well as the webinar we've had today with Donna. So, okay, we'll say bye for now, Donna. Thanks again, and we'll say bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.